Welcome to Mystery Theatre. Tonight, we venture beyond London's gaslit streets to the gentle hills of the English countryside, where church bells mark the hours and Sunday worship binds a community together, or so it appears. Hercule Poirot, the renowned Belgian detective, seeks respite from the city's clamor. His faithful companion, Captain Hastings, accompanies him to the village of St. Dunstan's Hollow, where an old friend has offered sanctuary. But beneath the thatched roofs and flowering hedgerows, shadows gather. For in this place of supposed peace, someone harbors a secret worth killing for. Join us for Death on the Sabbath, a tale of piety and poison, of buried sins and divine retribution, crafted in the spirit of the Golden Age, where every clue is fairly placed and justice, however delayed, is always served. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? Your presence illuminates our journey through these shadowed mysteries. Now, let the story unfold. Chapter 1. The Village of St. Dunstan's. The motor car crested the hill just as the afternoon sun broke through pewter clouds, casting golden light across the valley below. I confess that even I, Captain Arthur Hastings, a man accustomed to the grim realities of crime and its aftermath, felt my spirits lift at the sight. St. Dunstan's Hollow lay nestled in a fold of the Cotswold Hills like a jewel in velvet. Honey-colored cottages clustered around a village green, their gardens riotous with late summer roses. At the heart of it all rose the square Norman tower of St. Dunstan's Church, its weathered stones testament to 8 centuries of faithful service. "Charming," I declared, slowing the motor. "Absolutely charming, Poirot. Dr. Pemberton has done us a tremendous favor." My friend shifted in the passenger seat, his patent leather shoes, immaculate despite the journey, planted firmly on the floorboards. Hercule Poirot regarded the pastoral scene with an expression I had learned to recognize: polite appreciation, masking profound suspicion. "It is indeed picturesque, Hastings," he allowed, one hand rising to smooth his magnificent mustache. "But you will observe, will you not, that the most beautiful gardens often conceal the most persistent weeds?" "Really, Poirot," I protested. "Must you always see shadows where there is only sunshine? We're here to rest. Dr. Pemberton specifically said the village is the most peaceful place in England." "Précisément." His egg-shaped head tilted. "And such claims, they make Hercule Poirot most uneasy. The places that protest their innocence too loudly, they often have much to hide." I dismissed his cynicism as professional habit and guided the motor car down the winding lane into the village proper. We passed the Lamb and Flag public house, a blacksmith's forge now converted to a garage, and a row of shops whose painted signs swayed gently in the breeze. Finch and Sons Grocers, Pembury's Tea Room, the post office. Villagers paused in their Saturday afternoon errands to observe our arrival. I noted their expressions. Curious, certainly, but with an undercurrent of wariness that seemed excessive for such an isolated community. An elderly woman in black clutched her shopping basket closer as we passed. 2 men outside the pub fell silent mid-conversation. "They do not welcome strangers warmly," Poirot observed quietly. "This is most interesting." "Country folk are always reserved with outsiders," I said, though I had noticed it too. Dr. Pemberton's cottage stood at the far end of the village, a handsome Georgian property with a brass plate beside the door. We had barely stepped from the motor car when the door flew open and our host appeared. A rotund, red-faced man of 60, with the permanently harried expression of a country doctor. Poirot! Hastings! Thank heavens you've arrived." He pumped our hands vigorously, but I noticed his eyes darting toward the church tower as he spoke. "Come in, come in. You must be famished after your journey." The cottage interior was comfortable. Worn leather chairs, medical texts on crowded shelves, the pleasant aroma of pipe tobacco and furniture polish. A housekeeper brought tea and sandwiches while Dr. Pemberton settled us before the fire, though the September afternoon hardly warranted it. "You mentioned rest and recuperation in your letter," Poirot said, accepting a cup of tea with grave ceremony. "And yet, my friend, I observe that you yourself appear to be in need of such remedies. The shadows beneath your eyes, the tremor in your hands when you poured the milk, these suggest a man who has not slept well for some considerable time." Dr. Pemberton's cup clattered against its saucer. "You don't miss much, do you?" "It is my métier. I observe, I deduce, I understand. Something troubles you, Marcus. Something beyond the ordinary cares of village practice." Our host was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "It's probably nothing. Village gossip. Old feuds stirring up again." He glanced toward the window, toward the church tower visible above the hedgerow. "But there's been talk, accusations, and tomorrow is Sunday. You speak in riddles, mon ami." Dr. Pemberton set down his cup and leaned forward. "Harold Blackwood is the churchwarden here, has been for 30 years. He controls everything, the church funds, the parish council, half the village mortgages. There's nothing happens in St. Dunstan's Hollow that Blackwood doesn't know about and probably profit from." "A man of influence," I observed. "A man of tyranny," Pemberton corrected sharply. "Last month, young Geoffrey Blackwood returned from London, Harold's nephew, his only living relative. There was a tremendous row about the inheritance. Harold's threatened to leave everything to the church, cut Geoffrey out entirely. The whole village heard them shouting in the churchyard." Poirot's fingers steepled beneath his chin. "And this concerns you because Geoffrey isn't the only one who'd benefit from Harold Blackwood's demise." Pemberton's voice dropped lower still. "There are others, people with older grievances, things that happened during the war and before, secrets that Blackwood knows, that he's used to control people for decades." "You speak of blackmail?" "I speak of power, and power once threatened becomes dangerous." The doctor rose abruptly, pacing before the fireplace. "Last week, someone left a note on the church door, anonymous. It said, 'The wages of sin is death. Judgment comes on the Sabbath.' I felt a chill despite the fire's warmth. A threat? The vicar thinks it's merely a prank. Blackwood laughed it off publicly. But I've seen his face when he thinks no one's watching. He's frightened, Poirot, genuinely frightened. And yet he has not sought protection, contacted the authorities. Harold Blackwood asked for help? Pemberton laughed bitterly. He'd sooner die than admit weakness. Besides, whom would he call? Constable Davies is a good man, but utterly out of his depth with anything beyond poached rabbits. No, Blackwood believes he can handle this himself, whatever this is. Poirot rose and walked to the window, his small, precise figure silhouetted against the afternoon light. The church tower cast a long shadow across the green. "Tomorrow is Sunday," he said softly, "the Sabbath, and this note promised judgment." "Probably nonsense," Pemberton said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But I confess, when I heard you were between cases, I thought perhaps the presence of Hercule Poirot might serve as a deterrent. If someone is planning mischief, surely they would reconsider with the famous detective in attendance. You wish me to attend the Sunday service? I wish you to observe, to use those remarkable faculties of yours. If there is genuine danger, perhaps you can prevent tragedy rather than merely solve it afterward. Poirot turned from the window. His expression was grave, but not unkind. You have been a good friend to me, Marcus. When I was ill, it was your care that restored me. This small service I can render. He paused. But I must meet these players upon your village stage before the curtain rises. This Harold Blackwood, where might I find him this evening? At the church, preparing for tomorrow's service. He's there every Saturday evening, going over the accounts, polishing the brass, ensuring everything meets his exacting standards. Pemberton hesitated. Shall I introduce you? Non, non. Hercule Poirot. He prefers to form his own first impressions. Come, Hastings, let us take the evening air and visit this ancient house of worship. The church of St. Dunstan's was older than I had first supposed. Norman foundations with later Gothic additions, the whole mellowed by centuries of English weather into something timelessly beautiful. The churchyard wrapped around it, headstones tilting at gentle angles, yew trees standing sentinel. As we approached the south porch, voices drifted through the open door, one commanding and harsh, the other soft and placating. I don't care what the diocese recommends, Whitmore. This is my church, and I'll run it as I see fit. Harold, please. The bishop merely suggested. The bishop can mind his own affairs. I've given 40 years of service to St. Dunstan's, 40 years of my money, my time, my devotion. I'll not be lectured by some committee in London. Poirot touched my arm, and we paused in the porch's shadow. Through the gap in the door, I could see two figures in the nave. Harold Blackwood was a tall man in his 60s, powerfully built despite his years, with iron-gray hair swept back from a broad forehead. His face was handsome in a severe way, marred by the cruel set of his mouth and the cold calculation in his pale eyes. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, every inch the country squire accustomed to unquestioning obedience. The Reverend Thomas Whitmore made a striking contrast. Slight, stooped, with a gentle face and anxious eyes. His clerical collar seemed almost too large for his thin neck. He clutched a prayer book to his chest like a shield. "The communion wine," Whitmore ventured timidly. "The new supplier you've engaged, some of the parishioners have commented on the taste. The new supplier saves the parish 18 shillings a quarter. If Mrs. Thornton wishes to complain about the wine, she can contribute more to the collection plate." Blackwood's voice dripped contempt. "Now, is there anything else, or may I continue my inspection in peace?" No, of course. I merely, that is..." The vicar retreated toward the vestry. "I shall see you tomorrow morning, Harold, 8 o'clock sharp." 7:30. "I want the accounts reviewed before the early service." Yes, of course. 7:30. The vicar vanished through a side door. Blackwood remained in the nave, his cold gaze sweeping over the brass memorial plates, the carved wooden pews, the ancient baptismal font. His expression suggested a man surveying his kingdom. Poirot chose this moment to enter. "Monsieur Blackwood, I presume?" The churchwarden turned sharply. His eyes narrowed as they took in Poirot's distinctive appearance, the immaculate suit, the precisely waxed mustache, the patent leather shoes. "And who might you be?" "I am Hercule Poirot. I am visiting my friend, Dr. Pemberton, The good doctor suggested I might attend tomorrow's service. Something flickered in Blackwood's pale eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or calculation. "Poirot, the detective fellow. I've read about you in the papers." "You flatter me, monsieur." "I state a fact." Blackwood's gaze was assessing, cold. "What brings a famous detective to our quiet village? Surely we offer nothing to interest a man of your profession." "On the contrary, the English village, it fascinates me. So peaceful on the surface, and yet beneath. Beneath there are always currents, non? Passions that run deep, secrets that fester." Blackwood's face hardened. "You've been listening to gossip." "I have been listening to nothing, monsieur. I observe. It is what I do." Poirot's eyes swept the church interior with apparent casualness, though I knew he was cataloguing every detail. "A beautiful church, Norman with later additions, and these brasses, most impressive. You maintain them yourself?" "The sexton does the physical labor. I supervise." "Albert Finch, a man of long service, I understand." 40 years. He knows his place." Blackwood's tone made clear that knowing one's place was, in his view, a virtue above all others. Poirot merely smiled. "I look forward to tomorrow's service, Monsieur Blackwood. The little gray cells, they appreciate tradition and ceremony." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked back toward the porch, leaving me to nod awkwardly at the churchwarden before hurrying after him. Outside, the evening shadows had lengthened across the churchyard. Poirot paused beside a weathered headstone, his expression thoughtful. "What do you make of him, Hastings?" "Thoroughly unpleasant, the sort of petty tyrant every village seems to produce." "Petty?" Poirot's eyebrows rose. "No, I think not. Harold Blackwood is many things, but petty is not among them. He is a man who has built an empire. Small, perhaps, by London's standards, but absolute within its boundaries. Such men do not forgive threats to their power." "You think the threatening note is genuine? That someone truly means him harm?" Poirot did not answer immediately. His gaze had drifted to a newer section of the churchyard, where a simple stone memorial stood apart from the ancient graves. I moved closer and read the inscription, "In memory of those from this parish who gave their lives in the Great War." 1914, 1918 below were carved names, 8 of them young men from a village of barely 200 souls, a terrible toll. "The war," Poirot murmured. "Dr. Pemberton mentioned events from that time, secrets that Blackwood has used." "Blackmail, you mean?" "I mean leverage, Hastings, the currency of small communities. Everyone knows everyone's shame, but it is the person who is willing to speak that shame aloud who holds the power." He straightened his already immaculate tie. "Come, we shall return to Dr. Pemberton's. Tomorrow promises to be most instructive." As we walked back through the gathering dusk, I glanced over my shoulder at the church tower. For just a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing in the shadows of the lich gate, watching. But when I looked again, there was no one there. The church bell began to toll the hour. 6 solemn notes echoed across the village green. And somewhere in St. Dunstan's hollow, I could not help but feel a clock of another kind was counting down toward judgment. Chapter 2. The Body in the Vestry. I slept poorly that night, though I could not have said precisely why. The bed in Dr. Pemberton's guest room was comfortable, the cottage quiet, and yet I found myself starting awake at every creak of settling timber, every whisper of wind against the window pane. Poirot, I discovered at breakfast, had experienced no such difficulties. He sat at the table immaculately dressed, his egg precisely centered on its plate, his toast cut into mathematically equal triangles. "You look tired, Hastings," he observed with maddening cheerfulness. "The country air, it does not agree with you?" I kept thinking about that note. Judgment comes on the Sabbath. "It's Sunday now, Poirot." "Indeed it is." He dabbed his mustache with a napkin. "And we shall attend the early service at 8 o'clock. Dr. Pemberton has already departed. A patient in the outlying farms requires his attention. He sends his apologies." The morning was gray and cool, mist rising from the fields, as we walked the short distance to St. Dunstan's church. Other villagers were making their way along the lanes, dressed in their Sunday best, men in dark suits, women in modest hats and gloves. They nodded to us politely, but without warmth. The church bell began its summons as we passed through the lych gate. I noticed Albert Finch, the sexton, standing beside the door, a weathered man of 65, with the bent posture of one who had spent decades in physical labor. His hands, I observed, were gnarled but strong, stained with brass polish. "Morning, sirs," he said, touching his cap. "Visitors, are you? Dr. Pemberton's guests?" "Indeed," Poirot replied. "You are Monsieur Finch, the sexton?" "Just Finch, sir, Albert Finch. Been looking after this church since I was a lad of 25. His rheumy eyes drifted toward the tower. 40 years come Michaelmas. "A lifetime of service, most commendable." Finch shrugged, a gesture of weary resignation. "It's honest work. Someone's got to do it." We entered the church. The interior was dim, lit by candles, and what gray morning light filtered through the stained glass windows. Perhaps 30 parishioners had already taken their seats, farmers in uncomfortable collars, shopkeepers with their families, elderly widows in black. I spotted several faces from the previous day. Mrs. Edith Blackwood sat in the front pew, a handsome woman in her mid-50s with silver-streaked hair and an expression of practiced composure. Beside her, conspicuously, was an empty space, Harold Blackwood's seat. Behind them sat a younger man I did not recognize, late 20s, dark-haired, with the restless energy of someone who would rather be anywhere else. His resemblance to Harold Blackwood was unmistakable, though softer, less cruel. "The nephew," Poirot murmured. "Geoffrey Blackwood." At the organ, a thin woman with steel-gray hair arranged her music with precise, nervous movements. Miss Agatha Pembury, I presumed, the organist Dr. Pemberton had mentioned. She glanced repeatedly toward the vestry door, her fingers drumming against the wooden case. The Reverend Whitmore emerged from the vestry, prayer book in hand. His face was pale, his movements agitated. He whispered something to Miss Pembury, who shook her head. The church clock struck 8. Harold Blackwood had not appeared. A murmur rippled through the congregation. I saw Mrs. Blackwood turn slightly, her composure flickering. Geoffrey Blackwood smirked. Reverend Whitmore cleared his throat and approached the pulpit. "My dear friends," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "It appears our churchwarden has been delayed. I suggest we begin with a hymn while we await—" The vestry door burst open. Albert Finch stood in the doorway, his weathered face drained of all color. His mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before the words came. Hoarse, terrible. "He's dead, Mr. Blackwood. He's dead in the vestry." The congregation erupted. Women gasped. Men rose from their seats. Voices overlapped in a cacophony of shock and disbelief. Only Poirot remained still, his sharp eyes fixed on the faces around us, cataloging reactions with the precision of a scientist recording data. I saw Mrs. Blackwood's hand fly to her throat, but her eyes, I noted, held more shock than grief. Geoffrey Blackwood had gone very pale. His smirk vanished entirely. Miss Pembury clutched the organ as though it were the only solid thing in a reeling world. And Reverend Whitmore, poor Whitmore, seemed to crumple in on himself, the prayer book falling from nerveless fingers. Hastings. Poirot's voice was calm, commanding. Come. We pushed through the milling crowd toward the vestry. Finch still stood in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame, the other pointing into the small room beyond. I found him, the sexton babbled. Came to tell him the congregation was assembled. The door was locked from inside. I had to use my key. And there he was, just lying there. The vestry was a cramped space lined with wooden cupboards. Ecclesiastical robes hung from hooks, and a small desk sat beneath the single window. The room smelled of furniture polish, candle wax, and something else. Something bitter, almost medicinal. Harold Blackwood lay on the floor beside the desk. He was dressed for the service. Dark suit, starched collar, gold watch chain across his waistcoat. But his face was contorted in what could only be described as agony. His lips were drawn back, his eyes wide and staring, his hands clenched into rigid claws. A small glass lay shattered on the floor beside him, and a dark stain spread across the stone flags. Poirot knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb anything. His keen eyes swept the scene, the position of the corpse, the broken glass, the desk above. "Do not touch anything, Hastings," he said softly. "This is murder." Murder? I stared at the locked door, the single window firmly latched. But how? Finch said the door was locked from inside. The how, it will reveal itself. The what is already clear. Poirot pointed to the broken glass. "Wine, Hastings, communion wine, unless I am mistaken. And observe the victim's face, the contortion of the features, the rigidity of the muscles. This is strychnine poisoning, or I am very much deceived." A commotion at the doorway announced the arrival of Constable Davies, a young man with an honest, anxious face who looked utterly overwhelmed by the scene before him. "Lord have mercy," he breathed. "Mr. Blackwood, what do I—" "You will secure the church," Poirot said, rising smoothly. "No one is to leave until they have been questioned. You will send for Dr. Pemberton to examine the body, and you will touch nothing, in this room until I have completed my examination." Davies blinked. "And who might you be, sir?" "I am Hercule Poirot." The name registered. Davies's eyes widened. "The detective? The one who solved the Styles case?" "The same, and I am placing myself at your disposal, Constable. This village, it is too small to have resources for such an investigation, non? But Hercule Poirot, he has solved many such puzzles." Relief flooded the young constable's face. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I'll do exactly as you say." As Davies hurried away to secure the church, Poirot turned his attention back to the vestry. He moved with methodical precision, examining every surface, every object, every shadow. "The window," he murmured, "latched from inside, the door locked from inside. And yet the victim is dead, poisoned by his own communion wine." He lifted a silver decanter from the desk. It contained perhaps an inch of deep red liquid. "This is the source, the communion wine, prepared for this morning's service. But if Blackwood poured his own glass, then he poisoned himself? No, Hastings, the murderer is cleverer than that. Observe." Poirot pointed to a small brass key that lay on the desk beside a leather ledger. The key to this very room. Blackwood locked himself in, yes, but he was already dying when he did so. I struggled to follow his reasoning. Already dying? The symptoms of strychnine poisoning, they do not manifest instantly. There is a delay. 15 minutes, perhaps 30, depending on the dose and the victim's constitution. Blackwood arrived early, as was his habit. He reviewed the accounts. Poirot tapped the ledger. At some point, he poured himself a glass of wine from this decanter. Then he locked the door, perhaps hearing footsteps, perhaps simply desiring privacy. And then the poison took effect. Précisément, by the time the convulsions began, he was trapped, locked in with his own death, unable to call for help, unable to escape. Poirot's voice held a note of grim respect. A terrible end for a terrible man, but murder nonetheless. Who prepared this wine? I asked. Who had access to the vestry? Ah, Hastings, now you ask the essential questions. Poirot straightened. We must discover who brought this decanter here, and when. We must learn who had keys to the vestry, and we must understand why. What motive would drive someone to destroy Harold Blackwood in this place, at this time? He moved toward the door, then paused. Something had caught his attention. A small, folded piece of paper on the floor, half hidden beneath a fallen candle. Voila, he breathed, lifting it carefully. The note was written in block capitals, crude but legible. The wages of sin is death. Judgment has come. We rejoined the congregation in the nave. Dr. Pemberton had arrived, summoned from his patient by a breathless messenger, and was examining the body. The parishioners sat in uneasy clusters, their whispers filling the ancient space like the rustle of dry leaves. Constable Davies had posted himself at the main door, notebook in hand, though he seemed uncertain what to write in it. Ladies and gentlemen, Poirot's voice cut through the murmurs, calm and authoritative. I must ask that each of you remain until I have had the opportunity to speak with you. A terrible crime has been committed here today, and the perpetrator is almost certainly known to us all. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. I didn't do it. Geoffrey Blackwood's voice was loud, defensive. Whatever you're thinking, I didn't do it. Yes, we argued. Everyone knows that. But I didn't kill him. No one has accused you of anything, Monsieur Blackwood. Not yet, but you will, won't you? The nephew who stood to inherit. The convenient suspect. Geoffrey's hands clenched at his sides. I was at the Lamb and Flag until closing last night. Half the village can vouch for me. Then you have nothing to fear from the truth. Poirot's eyes swept the congregation. I will speak with each of you in turn. For now, I ask only, who prepared the communion wine for this morning's service? Silence. Then, reluctantly, Miss Pembury raised her hand. I brought it from the cellar yesterday evening. It's my duty, you see. I've prepared the communion elements for 20 years. And you placed it where? On the vestry table, where it always goes. Mr. Blackwood inspects everything before the service. Her voice cracked. I left it at 6 o'clock. The vestry was empty then. And the vestry door? Unlocked. It's never locked until Mr. Blackwood arrives. Who else has a key? Only Mr. Blackwood, the vicar, and Finch. She hesitated. And there's a spare in the vicar's office, I believe. Poirot nodded slowly. So, between 6 o'clock yesterday evening and 7:30 this morning, anyone might have entered the vestry and tampered with the wine. Anyone with a key, I pointed out. "Or anyone who found the door unlocked," Poirot corrected. "The vestry, it is not visible from the road. The church, it stands empty through the night. A determined killer would have many hours in which to work." Mrs. Blackwood rose from her pew. Her composure had returned, though her face remained pale. "Monsieur Poirot, my husband was not a popular man. I would not insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise, but he was still my husband. I want to know who did this. And you, madame, where were you last evening?" Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or indignation. "At home. Where else would I be?" "Alone?" She hesitated. "Yes, alone. Harold was here at the church, preparing for today. He often worked late on Saturday evenings." "And this morning?" "I walked to church with the Thompson family. We arrived together at 7:45. Poirot accepted this with a slight nod, though I noticed he made no comment about her alibi, or lack thereof, for the previous evening. "Dr. Pemberton." Poirot turned to the vestry doorway where our host had emerged, his face grim. "What can you tell us?" Pemberton wiped his hands on a handkerchief. "Strychnine poisoning, without question. The symptoms are unmistakable, the convulsions, the risus sardonicus. He died in agony, Poirot. Terrible agony. And the time of death? Difficult to say precisely. The rigor is consistent with death occurring approximately 90 minutes ago, so between 6:30 and 7 o'clock this morning. Before the congregation arrived. Well before. He would have been dead or dying when the first parishioners entered the church." Poirot's eyes gleamed. So the killer did not need to be present for the death. They merely needed to ensure that Blackwood drank the poisoned wine at the appropriate time. "The appointment," I said suddenly. "Reverend Whitmore, you were to meet Blackwood at 7:30 to review the accounts. Did you come?" All eyes turned to the vicar, who had been standing silent and ashen near the pulpit. He seemed to shrink under the collective gaze. I came at 7:30, as agreed," he stammered, "but the vestry door was locked. I knocked, called his name. There was no answer. I assumed he had stepped out or was delayed. I went to prepare for the service and thought nothing more of it until... He could not finish. "You heard nothing? Saw nothing?" "Nothing. The church was empty. I heard only the birds outside and my own footsteps." Poirot was silent for a long moment, his little gray cells clearly working behind those sharp, intelligent eyes. "The wages of sin," he murmured at last. "Judgment has come." He looked up, his gaze sweeping the frightened faces before him. "Someone in this village believed Harold Blackwood deserved to die. Someone planned this murder with care and precision, and someone, perhaps someone in this very room, will answer for it." The church clock began to chime. The half-hour. Outside, the September sun had burned through the morning mist, but inside St. Dunstan's, darkness had taken hold, the darkness of secrets, of hatred, of murder. And at its heart stood Hercule Poirot, patient and implacable as justice itself. Chapter 3. Testimonies and Tea. The hours that followed were a blur of hushed conversations and nervous glances. Constable Davies, under Poirot's gentle guidance, had arranged for the congregation to wait in the church hall adjacent to St. Dunstan's, a modest building of red brick where the Women's Institute held their meetings and the Sunday school convened. Mrs. Thornton, a formidable woman who appeared to command the village's domestic operations, had organized tea and biscuits. The parishioners sat in small clusters, their voices low, their eyes darting toward the door whenever it opened. Poirot had commandeered the vicar's office for his interviews, a cramped room lined with theological texts and smelling faintly of pipe tobacco and old paper. A crucifix hung above the desk, and weak sunlight filtered through a window that overlooked the churchyard. I sat beside Poirot, notebook in hand, as he summoned witnesses one by one. Miss Agatha Pembury entered first, her thin frame rigid with anxiety. She perched on the edge of the chair as though prepared to flee at any moment, her fingers twisting in her lap. "Miss Pembury," Poirot began gently, "you have been organist at St. Dunstan's for how long?" 23 years. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Since I was 22. Mother thought it a respectable occupation for an unmarried woman." "And in that time, you have prepared the communion elements?" "Every week without fail. It's always been my duty. I collect the wine from the cellar, the wafers from the vestry cupboard. I set everything out on Saturday evening so it's ready for Sunday." "Walk me through yesterday evening, if you please. Every detail, no matter how small." Miss Pembury's eyes darted to the window, then back. "I arrived at 5:30. The church was empty. Reverend Whitmore was at the vicarage preparing his sermon. I unlocked the vestry with the key I borrowed from the vicar's office." "You do not have your own key?" "No. Only Mr. Blackwood, the vicar, and Finch have keys. The spare stays in the vicar's desk drawer. Anyone who needs access simply borrows it and returns it afterward." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Anyone? This drawer? It is not locked?" "No. Reverend Whitmore trusts his parishioners." A bitter note crept into her voice. Perhaps too much. "Continue, please." "I went to the cellar and retrieved a fresh bottle of communion wine. The usual supplier, until Mr. Blackwood changed it last month. The new wine is cheaper, inferior." Her lips pressed together. "I decanted it into the silver flagon, set it on the vestry table with the chalice and paten, and left. It was 6 o'clock precisely. The church clock was striking as I locked the vestry door." "And you returned the spare key to the vicar's office?" "Yes. I placed it in the drawer, just as I always do." Poirot was silent for a moment. "Miss Pembury, I must ask you a delicate question. What were your feelings toward Harold Blackwood?" The transformation was remarkable. The timid, nervous woman seemed to harden before our eyes, her jaw tightening, her eyes flashing with something that looked very much like hatred. "He was a tyrant," she said, her voice low and fierce. "A petty, cruel tyrant who delighted in making others miserable. Do you know what he did to me, Monsieur Poirot? 20 years ago, I was engaged to be married. Thomas Harding, Dr. Harding's younger brother. We were happy. We had plans. What happened? Blackwood happened. The words were spat out like poison. Thomas worked at Blackwood's estate as an under-gardener. One day, a silver candlestick went missing from the manor. Blackwood accused Thomas of theft. There was no evidence, none, but Blackwood's word was law in this village. Thomas was dismissed without a reference. His reputation was ruined. And the engagement? Thomas couldn't face the shame. He left for London, promised to send for me when he'd established himself. Her voice cracked. He died 6 months later. Influenza, they said, but I know the truth. Blackwood killed him as surely as if he'd put a knife in his heart. And the candlestick. Found a year later in Mrs. Blackwood's own dressing room. She'd mislaid it herself, but by then, Thomas was dead, and Blackwood never apologized, never even acknowledged his mistake. The bitterness in her voice was palpable. Decades of grief compressed into those few sentences. "Miss Pembury," Poirot said softly, "where were you this morning between 6 and 7 o'clock?" She met his gaze without flinching. "At home, alone, practicing hymns for the service." A thin smile crossed her lips. "I have no alibi, Monsieur Poirot, but I did not kill Harold Blackwood. I am not sorry he is dead. I would be lying if I said otherwise, but I did not kill him." Poirot nodded slowly. "Thank you, Miss Pembury. You have been most helpful." When she had gone, I turned to Poirot. "Strong motive, no alibi. Access to the communion wine. She's a prime suspect, surely." "She is a woman who has nursed a grievance for 20 years, Hastings. Such people are often bitter, often angry, but they have learned to live with their pain. Murder requires a catalyst, a precipitating event. What pushed our killer to act now, after so many years of patience?" It was a question I could not answer. Albert Finch was our next witness. The sexton entered with cap in hand, his weathered face still pale from the morning's discovery. "Sit, please, Monsieur Finch." Poirot gestured to the chair. "You have had a terrible shock." 40 years I've worked in that church," Finch said, lowering himself into the seat. "Seen christenings, weddings, funerals, but never anything like this." "You discovered the body. Tell me exactly what happened." Finch nodded, his gnarled hands gripping his cap. "I arrived at 7:15, same as every Sunday. Opened the church, lit the candles, checked the flowers. Mrs. Thompson does the arrangements, but I make sure they're positioned proper." "And Mr. Blackwood?" "Wasn't in the nave. I assumed he was in the vestry. He always arrives early, you see, 7 o'clock or before. Likes to go over the accounts, check everything's in order before the vicar arrives." "When did you try the vestry door?" "Not until just before 8. The congregation was assembling, and Reverend Whitmore was getting anxious. He'd already tried the door at 7:30, found it locked, and thought Mr. Blackwood must be delayed. But when 8 o'clock came, and still no sign of him..." Finch shuddered. "I used my key. The door was locked from inside, just as the vicar said. And there he was, lying on the floor, his face all twisted up like... He could not continue. Poirot gave him a moment to compose himself. "Monsieur Finch, you have a key to the vestry. Where do you keep it?" "On my belt." Finch patted the ring of keys at his waist. "Always have it with me. Church, vestry, cellar, tower. I've got keys to everything." "And last night? Where were you between 6 o'clock and this morning?" "Home with the wife. We had supper, listened to the wireless, went to bed at 9. I'm an early riser, always have been. Up at 5:30, cup of tea, then walk to the church." "You saw no one on your way? Nothing unusual?" Finch hesitated. "Well, now that you mention it, I did see someone near the church. Early, must have been 5:45 or thereabouts. Just a figure in the mist walking away from the lich gate." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Could you identify this person?" "Too far off, and the mist was thick, but it looked like a man. Tall, wearing a dark coat." He paused. "Could have been anyone, I suppose. Early morning walkers aren't unusual." "The direction, which way did this figure go?" "Toward the village green, past the war memorial." Poirot filed this information away with a slight nod. "One more question, Monsieur Finch. You have worked under Harold Blackwood for many years. How would you describe your relationship?" The sexton's expression hardened. "He was my employer. I did my job. He paid me, not generously, mind, but regular. Beyond that..." He shrugged. Mr. Blackwood wasn't a man you got close to. He gave orders, and you followed them, or you found yourself looking for work elsewhere. He never wronged you personally? Something flickered in Finch's rheumy eyes, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. We all have our grievances, Monsieur Poirot. 40 years is a long time, but I'm a practical man. A dead employer pays no wages. It was a curiously cold assessment, and I noticed Poirot's eyebrows rise slightly as Finch departed. Geoffrey Blackwood entered with the defiant air of a man expecting accusation. He threw himself into the chair without invitation, arms crossed, jaw set. "Let's get this over with," he said. "I know what you're thinking. The nephew who inherits. The obvious suspect." "I am thinking nothing, Monsieur Blackwood. I am merely gathering facts." Poirot's voice was mild, unthreatening. "You quarreled with your uncle recently." "I understand." "Everyone knows that. We had words in the churchyard last week. Half the village heard us." Geoffrey's laugh was bitter. "Uncle Harold was going to change his will, leave everything to the church, his precious St. Dunstan's. After everything my father did for him, after all the promises he made." "Your father?" "Harold's younger brother. Died when I was 10. Father worked himself to death, managing the estate while Harold collected the profits and played lord of the manor. When Father died, Harold promised to look after me, promised I'd inherit when the time came." His voice cracked with anger. "Last month, he told me he'd changed his mind, said I was a disappointment, a wastrel who didn't deserve the Blackwood name." "And this prompted your argument?" "Wouldn't you argue? 20 years of being treated like a poor relation, and then he pulls the rug out from under me?" Geoffrey leaned forward. "But I didn't kill him. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to, but I didn't." "Your alibi?" "The lamb and flag. I was there from 8 in the evening until closing, midnight or thereabouts. Tom Higgins, the landlord, can confirm it. So can half a dozen others who watched me drink myself into a stupor." He smiled grimly. "Not my finest moment, but it proves I wasn't creeping around the church poisoning communion wine." "And this morning?" "Slept late. Headache, as you might imagine. I walked to church with Mrs. Blackwood, my aunt, and arrived just before 8. Poirot considered this. "You say your uncle was going to leave everything to the church. Was this change already made, or merely threatened?" Geoffrey's eyes narrowed. "I don't know. He hadn't seen the solicitor yet, as far as I know. But Harold's word was law. Once he decided something, it happened." "So, at present, the will still names you as heir?" "I suppose so, unless he made changes I don't know about." "Most interesting." Poirot steepled his fingers. "One more question, Monsieur Blackwood. Did your uncle have enemies? People with specific grievances against him?" Geoffrey laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Enemies? Take your pick. Miss Pembury, whose fiancé he destroyed. Finch, whom he treated like a slave. Dr. Harding, whose brother was the fiancé in question. Mrs. Thornton, whose husband lost his shop when Harold called in alone during the hard times." He spread his hands. "This village is built on Harold Blackwood's victims. Any one of them could have done it. And yet someone did. Someone specific. Someone with the opportunity and the will to act." Geoffrey held Poirot's gaze. "It wasn't me. Prove otherwise, if you can." When he had gone, I exhaled slowly. He's either innocent or a very good actor. The two are not mutually exclusive, Hastings. But his alibi, if it holds, is strong. We must verify it with this Monsieur Higgins. Poirot glanced at his pocket watch. "But first, I think we must speak with Dr. Harding. His connection to this affair intrigues me greatly. Dr. Marcus Harding had not been at the church that morning. He was not, he explained, a regular churchgoer. We found him at his surgery, a neat Georgian building on the village green, where he received us in a consulting room that smelled of carbolic and leather. He was a handsome man of 50, with silver-streaked dark hair and intelligent eyes that held a deep sadness. "I heard the news," he said quietly. "The whole village is talking. Harold Blackwood, poisoned in his own church. I cannot say I'm surprised. You expected violence against him?" "I expected consequences." Harding gestured for us to sit. Harold Blackwood spent his life accumulating power and using it to hurt people. Eventually, such debts come due. Your brother was among those he hurt. Harding's expression tightened. "Thomas." "Yes. Blackwood destroyed him over a misplaced candlestick. My brother was innocent, but innocence meant nothing against Harold's word." He paused. "Thomas died in London, alone and broken. I have never forgiven Harold for that. And yet you remained in St. Dunstan's Hollow. This is my home, my practice. My patients need me." A bitter smile crossed his face. "Besides, leaving would have meant letting Harold win. I refused to give him that satisfaction." "Where were you this morning, Doctor?" "At home until 7, then called to the Pemberton cottage to attend a patient. I was there when the messenger arrived with news of Blackwood's death." "You can prove this?" "Dr. Pemberton can confirm my arrival time, and my housekeeper saw me leave." He met Poirot's gaze steadily. "I did not kill Harold Blackwood, Monsieur Poirot. I won't pretend to mourn him, but murder is not my way. I took an oath to preserve life, not destroy it." Poirot nodded slowly. "One more question, Doctor. You have medical knowledge. The poison used was strychnine. Where might someone obtain such a substance in a village like this?" Harding's eyes flickered. "Strychnine has legitimate uses, rat poison, for instance. Any farmer might have some, and—" He hesitated. "I keep a small supply in my surgery, for medical purposes. It's locked away, of course, but a determined person might find a way. Yes." The word was barely a whisper. "I suppose they might." Chapter 4. The Sins of the Past. The afternoon had turned gray and heavy, clouds pressing low over the Cotswold hills like a mourner's veil. Poirot and I walked the narrow lane from Dr. Harding's surgery toward the village green, each lost in our own thoughts. "A tangled web, Hastings," Poirot murmured, his patent leather shoes picking carefully between puddles. "So many threads, so many grievances, and yet I feel we have not yet grasped the central strand." "You don't think it's Miss Pembury or Geoffrey Blackwood?" "Miss Pembury has motive, certainly, but 20 years is a long time to wait for vengeance. And young Monsieur Blackwood, his anger is hot, immediate. The poisoning of communion wine suggests something colder, more calculated." He shook his head. "Non, there is something we are missing, some connection that binds these events together." We paused before the war memorial, a simple stone cross inscribed with the names of the villages fallen, 8 names carved in sober capitals, 8 young men who had marched away and never returned. Poirot studied the inscription with unusual intensity. "Dr. Pemberton mentioned the war," I said. "Secrets from that time?" "Indeed he did." Poirot's finger traced one of the names. "Private William Finch, 1895-1917. Finch, a relative of our sexton, perhaps?" "His son, I would imagine. The ages would be right." "A son lost to the war." Poirot's voice was soft. "Such grief never truly heals, Hastings. It merely calcifies, becomes part of the bone. He moved to examine the other names. Most meant nothing to me. Thompson's, Harding's, a Pemberton. But one caught my attention. Sergeant James Whitmore, 1890, 1916. Whitmore? The vicar's family? His brother, perhaps, or cousin. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The vicar is approximately 60 years of age. A man named James Whitmore, who died in 1916, would have been his contemporary. What are you thinking, Poirot? I am thinking that the past, it casts long shadows in small villages, and Harold Blackwood was old enough to have lived through the war years as a young man. He straightened his coat. Come, Hastings. I wish to speak with someone who remembers those times clearly. We found Mrs. Thornton in the church hall, marshalling the tea service with military precision. She was a formidable woman of 70-odd years, with iron-gray hair pinned beneath a sensible hat and eyes that missed nothing. "Monsieur Poirot," she said crisply, "I wondered when you'd get round to me. Sit down. Tea?" "Thank you, madame. You are most kind." She poured 3 cups with practiced efficiency and settled across from us, her back straight as a guardsman's. "I suppose you want to know about Harold Blackwood," she said. "Whether I'm glad he's dead. The answer is yes. He ruined my husband's business in '32, called in the loan just when we needed more time. Arthur never recovered. Died 2 years later. Heart gave out." Her voice was matter-of-fact, unemotional. "So, yes, I had reason to hate the man. But I didn't poison him, if that's what you're asking. I am asking about the past, madame. The war years. You have lived in St. Dunstan's Hollow all your life, no?" Something shifted in her expression. A flicker of wariness quickly suppressed. "Born here, married here, will die here. What of it?" "I am curious about the names on the war memorial. 8 young men. A terrible loss for such a small community." Terrible. The word was flat. Half a generation gone. Changed everything. And Harold Blackwood, he did not serve? The silence that followed was electric. Mrs. Thornton's teacup paused halfway to her lips, then lowered slowly to its saucer. "No," she said finally. "Harold did not serve. He was of military age, surely. The records would show he was exempt." The words were bitten off short. "Reserved occupation," they called it. "Essential agricultural work. His father owned the estate, you see. Someone had to manage the farms." "And this exemption, it was legitimate?" Mrs. Thornton's eyes met Poirot's with a hard, knowing look. Legitimate enough on paper, but everyone knew the truth. Old Mr. Blackwood paid someone off, a doctor, a tribunal member, who knows. Harold was healthy as a horse. Could have served, should have served. Her voice dropped. Instead, he stayed home while better men died. This was known in the village? Known and resented, but what could anyone do? The Blackwoods owned half the county. After the war, Harold inherited everything, and those of us who remembered, well, we learned to keep our mouths shut. Poirot leaned forward slightly. "There is more, madame. I sense it. Something specific. Something that connects Harold Blackwood to the names on that memorial." For a long moment, Mrs. Thornton was silent. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its briskness, becoming tired and old. "James Whitmore," she said quietly. "The vicar's older brother. He was engaged to marry a girl from the village. Pretty thing, daughter of the local schoolmaster. Harold Blackwood wanted her for himself. When James enlisted in 1915, Harold saw his chance. He pursued this young woman? Pursued, seduced, promised marriage. By the time James came home on leave in 1916, she was carrying Harold's child. Mrs. Thornton's lip curled with contempt. James found out. They quarreled, Harold and James. Terrible row, right here in the village. James went back to France. 3 weeks later, he was dead. Killed at the Somme, they said. But Thomas Whitmore, the vicar, he always believed James threw himself into danger deliberately, that Harold had killed him as surely as any German bullet. I felt a chill despite the warmth of the tea. What happened to the girl? And the child? She died in childbirth, the baby too. Some said it was a mercy. Mrs. Thornton's voice was hollow. Harold married Edith Price 6 months later, a suitable match, his father's choice, and life went on. But Thomas Whitmore never forgot, never forgave. The vicar, I breathed. He blames Blackwood for his brother's death. Has blamed him for 40 years. Mrs. Thornton fixed Poirot with a penetrating stare. Young Thomas was barely 18 when James died. He'd planned to study law, follow his father into practice. Instead, he found religion, took orders, asked specifically to be assigned to St. Dunstan's when the position opened. He's been here ever since, watching Harold Blackwood grow old and prosperous while his brother moulders in a French grave. Poirot was very still. And Harold Blackwood, he knew of this resentment. Harold knew everything. He used it the way he used everything. Kept Thomas Whitmore under his thumb. Controlled the church finances. Made sure the vicar knew who held the real power. A bitter smile crossed her face. Some said it amused him, having his victim's brother serve in his church. Harold always did enjoy cruelty. We left Mrs. Thornton to her tea service and walked in silence toward the vicarage, a modest stone building adjacent to the church, its garden overgrown and melancholy. The vicar, I said. He had the strongest motive of all. 40 years of hatred simmering beneath that mild exterior. And access, Poirot added. He has a key to the vestry. He knew Blackwood's Saturday routine. He could have poisoned the wine at any time during the night. But why now? After all these years? Poirot did not answer immediately. We had reached the vicarage gate when he stopped, his eyes fixed on something in the garden. I followed his gaze and saw Reverend Whitmore seated on a weathered bench beneath an apple tree, his head bowed, his hands clasped as if in prayer. He looked up as we approached, and I was struck by the change in him. The nervous, fluttering clergyman of the morning had vanished. In his place sat a man who seemed hollowed out, emptied of everything but exhaustion. "Monsieur Poirot," he said quietly, "I wondered when you would come. You know why I am here, Reverend?" "I can guess." Whitmore gestured to the bench beside him. "Please, sit. I am tired of pretending." Poirot settled beside him, and I remained standing, notebook ready. "Mrs. Thornton has told us about your brother," Poirot said gently. "About James, and what Harold Blackwood did to him." Whitmore's eyes closed briefly. "She would. Margaret Thornton has a memory like a steel trap and a tongue to match." He sighed deeply. "Yes, James was my brother, my hero, really. Everything I wanted to be, strong, brave, principled. When Harold destroyed him, something broke in me that has never healed. And yet you remained here, served in his church, submitted to his authority. Penance. The word was barely whispered. I came here to punish myself as much as to watch him. Every Sunday, seeing his face in the front pew, knowing what he had done, it was my private torment, my hair shirt. Some would call that obsession, not penance. Perhaps they would be right. Whitmore opened his eyes and met Poirot's gaze directly. "You want to know if I killed him? The answer is no. I have dreamed of his death for 40 years, imagined it in 1,000 different ways. But I am a man of God, Monsieur Poirot. I could not take a life, no matter how deserving of death. And yet someone did. Someone with access to the Vestry, knowledge of the routine, and motivation stretching back decades. It was not I. Where were you last night, Reverend? Between 6 o'clock, when Miss Pembury left the Vestry, and this morning. Here, in the vicarage, I was preparing my sermon. The text was from Galatians on reaping what one sows. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Ironic in retrospect. I went to bed at 11, rose at 6, and walked to the church at 7. The vestry door was locked when you arrived at 7:30. You tried it? Yes. I knocked, called out. There was no answer. I assumed Harold had stepped out, perhaps to inspect the grounds, as he sometimes did. I went to the nave to prepare for the service. His voice broke slightly. If I had broken down the door, perhaps— He was already dead, Reverend. Dr. Pemberton has established the time of death as before 7 o'clock. Nothing you could have done would have saved him. Whitmore nodded slowly, but I saw no relief in his eyes, only a vast, weary sadness. There is something more you wish to tell me, Poirot said quietly. Something that weighs upon you. I see it in your face, in the set of your shoulders. What is it, Reverend? What have you not said? The silence stretched between them. A blackbird sang in the apple tree above, incongruously cheerful. Last night, Whitmore said finally, around 10 o'clock, I saw someone in the churchyard. I straightened. Who? I don't know. I was closing my curtains when I noticed movement near the south porch. A figure, dark coat, moving quietly. They entered the church through the main door. And you did not investigate? I assumed it was Harold. He often worked late on Saturdays, checking accounts, fussing over details. It did not seem unusual. Whitmore's hands twisted in his lap. But this morning, when I found the vestry locked, when we discovered, I realized that what I saw might have been the murderer. You saw this person enter. Did you see them leave? No. I drew the curtains and returned to my sermon. I heard nothing more. Poirot was silent for a long moment. This figure, could you discern anything about them? Height, build, gait? Tall, moving carefully, as if they did not wish to be heard. Beyond that, Whitmore shook his head. The light was poor. I saw only a shadow. A man or a woman? I assumed a man. The height suggested it, but I cannot be certain. We left the vicar to his garden and his grief. The afternoon was fading toward evening, the clouds thickening overhead. 2 witnesses, I said as we walked back toward the village. Finch saw someone leaving the church at 5:45 this morning. The vicar saw someone entering at 10 o'clock last night. If we could identify either figure, the timeline, it begins to take shape. Hastings. Poirot's eyes were distant, calculating. The vestry was accessible from 6 o'clock Saturday evening until Harold Blackwood locked himself inside, sometime before 7 o'clock Sunday morning. The killer had all night to act. But why wait until morning? Why not poison the wine immediately? Perhaps they could not. Perhaps they were interrupted. Poirot stopped suddenly, his hand gripping my arm. Or perhaps, Hastings, we are looking at this from the wrong direction entirely. What do you mean? The communion wine. It was the obvious vehicle for the poison, but it was also the most risky. Blackwood was not the only one who might drink from that flagon. What if Miss Pembury had taken a sip while preparing it? What if the vicar had sampled it during his morning preparations? You're saying the killer didn't care who died? Non. I am saying the killer was certain, absolutely certain, that only Harold Blackwood would drink from that particular source. His mustache twitched. And that certainty, it tells us something very important about our murderer. What? But Poirot did not answer. His gaze had drifted toward the church, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Come, Hastings, there is one more person I must speak with today. Someone we have overlooked, someone who knows this church, this village, and Harold Blackwood better than anyone. Who? His wife. Poirot's voice was soft. Mrs. Edith Blackwood, the woman who lived with a tyrant for 40 years and showed less grief at his death than at the disruption to her Sunday morning. Chapter 5. The Chalice and the Truth. Blackwood House stood apart from the village proper, a handsome Georgian manor at the end of a long drive lined with ancient oaks. The building spoke of old money and older pretensions, symmetrical windows, ivy-clad walls, a portico designed to impress visitors with the owner's consequence. A housemaid admitted us to a drawing-room of faded elegance. The furnishings were expensive but worn, the portraits on the walls darkened by age and neglect. It was, I thought, a house that had been wealthy once, but was now merely holding on to the appearance of wealth. Mrs. Edith Blackwood received us with composure that bordered on coolness. She had changed from her morning church attire into a simple black dress. Mourning already assumed, though her eyes remained dry. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, she gestured to a sofa. Please, sit. I assume you have questions about my husband's death. I do, madam, and I thank you for receiving us at such a difficult time. Difficult? She repeated the word as though tasting it. Yes, I suppose it is. Difficult, though perhaps not in the way you imagine. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. You speak with remarkable frankness. I have spent 40 years being careful with my words. Monsieur Poirot, measuring every phrase, moderating every opinion, ensuring that nothing I said could be used against me. Her chin lifted. Harold is dead. I find I no longer have the energy for pretense. You were not happy in your marriage. It was not a question, and she did not treat it as one. I was 18 when we married. Harold was 25, handsome, heir to all this. She gestured at the room around her. My father was a country solicitor with 3 daughters and no sons. The match was considered advantageous. I was given no choice in the matter. And the marriage itself? A prison. The word was spoken without heat, as simple statement of fact. Harold controlled everything, the household accounts, my correspondence, my movements. I was permitted to attend church and visit approved neighbors, nothing more. For 40 years, I have been a possession, not a wife. I shifted uncomfortably. Such candor about a recently deceased husband seemed almost indecent, but Poirot merely nodded, his expression thoughtful. You must have wished for his death, madame, many times. Many times. She met his gaze without flinching. I dreamed of it, planned it even, in the dark hours of the night. But I never acted. I lacked the courage, I suppose. Or perhaps I simply knew that I would be the obvious suspect. And yet someone else possessed both the courage and the cunning. Yes, a ghost of a smile crossed her face. Someone freed me. I do not know whether to thank them or fear them." Poirot was silent for a moment, his little gray cells visibly working behind those keen eyes. "Madame Blackwood, I must ask you about last evening. Where were you between 6 o'clock and this morning?" "Here, alone, as I told you at the church. Harold left for St. Dunstan's at 5:30, his Saturday ritual. He would not return until nearly midnight, sometimes later." Her voice held a bitter edge. "I dined alone, read for a while, retired at 10. The servants can confirm I did not leave the house." "You have servants?" "A cook and a housemaid. They live in the village, not here. They departed at 7 o'clock after serving my supper." "So you were truly alone from 7 o'clock onward?" "Yes." She held his gaze steadily. "I have no alibi, Monsieur Poirot. I'm aware how that appears." "And this morning?" "I rose at 7, dressed and walked to church with Geoffrey. We met by arrangement at the end of the drive." "You and your nephew, you are on good terms?" Something flickered in her eyes. "Geoffrey is Harold's heir, not mine. I have no children. When Harold died, I expected to be turned out with nothing. But Geoffrey has been kind. He has assured me I may remain at Blackwood House for as long as I wish. Generous of him. Pragmatic, perhaps. A young bachelor requires someone to manage the household." She paused. "But yes, we understand each other. We have both suffered under Harold's tyranny." Poirot rose and moved to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. I recognized the pose. He was approaching something important. "Madame, I wish to ask you about the communion wine. You attend services regularly, do you not?" "Every Sunday without fail," Harold insisted. "And you partake of the communion?" "Of course." "Then you are familiar with the wine used, the taste, the quality." Mrs. Blackwood's brow furrowed. "I suppose so, though I confess I pay little attention. One sips, one moves on." "Your husband recently changed suppliers. A cheaper wine. Some parishioners noticed the difference." "Harold was always finding ways to economize. Penny wise, pound foolish, as my mother used to say." Poirot turned from the window. "Madame, this is most important. Did your husband have a habit of drinking the communion wine before the service? A private ritual, perhaps?" The question seemed to surprise her. She was silent for a moment, thinking. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, he did. Every Sunday morning, while reviewing the accounts, Harold would pour himself a small glass from the communion flagon. He called it testing the quality. I always thought it rather sacrilegious, but Harold never cared for such niceties." Poirot's eyes gleamed with sudden intensity. "Every Sunday, without fail?" "As far as I know, he had done so for years. Why do you ask?" But Poirot did not answer. He was pacing now, his small feet moving rapidly across the carpet, his mustache twitching with excitement. "The killer knew," he murmured, half to himself. "The killer knew of this habit, knew that Blackwood would drink from the flagon before the service. That is why they were certain, absolutely certain, that no one else would be harmed." "Poirot?" I ventured. "What are you thinking?" He stopped abruptly, wheeling to face Mrs. Blackwood once more. "Madame, who else knew of your husband's Sunday morning ritual? Who knew that he tasted the communion wine before the service?" She considered the question carefully. "The household, I suppose. The servants would have heard him speak of it. And the church staff, Finch, certainly, and Miss Pembury. They have both been at St. Dunstan's for decades. Reverend Whitmore as well." "Anyone else?" "Geoffrey knew. Harold boasted of it once at dinner, how he ensured quality by personal inspection. Geoffrey thought it absurd. She paused. And Dr. Harding, he once treated Harold for indigestion on a Sunday morning. Harold complained that the communion wine had been off. The doctor would have understood the implication. Poirot nodded slowly. So the knowledge was not secret, but neither was it widely known. A circle of perhaps 7 or 8 people. I suppose so. And any of them could have poisoned the wine on Saturday evening, knowing that Harold Blackwood, and only Harold Blackwood, would drink from it before the morning service. Mrs. Blackwood's composure finally cracked, just slightly. I saw her hands tremble as she clasped them in her lap. You're saying the murder was planned. Carefully, deliberately planned. Précisément. Poirot's voice was grave. This was no crime of passion, madame. This was an execution. We took our leave of Blackwood House as twilight settled over the valley. The clouds had finally broken, releasing a soft, persistent rain that blurred the edges of the world. The circle narrows, Hastings, Poirot said as we walked back toward the village. 7 or 8 people knew of Blackwood's Sunday ritual. One of them used that knowledge to kill him. But which one? They all have motives. They all had opportunity. Ah, but opportunity is not quite so equal as it appears. Poirot raised a finger. Consider, the poison was administered through the communion wine. Miss Pembury prepared that wine and left it in the vestry at 6 o'clock. From that moment until Blackwood's arrival the next morning, the vestry was accessible to anyone with a key, or anyone who found the door unlocked. The vicar saw someone enter the church at 10 o'clock. Finch saw someone leaving at 5:45 in the morning. 2 sightings, perhaps the same person, perhaps not. Poirot's brow furrowed. But there is something that troubles me, Hastings, something that does not quite fit. What? The strychnine. Dr. Harding mentioned that it is used as rat poison, common enough on any farm, but it is also kept in his surgery. The question is, where did the killer obtain it? Does it matter? The effect is the same. It matters greatly, mon ami, because the source of the poison may tell us much about the identity of the poisoner. We had reached the village green. The rain was falling harder now, driving most residents indoors. But a light burned in the window of Dr. Harding's surgery, and Poirot turned toward it with sudden purpose. Come, Hastings, there is something I must verify. Dr. Harding admitted us with weary courtesy. His surgery was quiet, the waiting room empty, the examination room dark beyond a half-closed door. Monsieur Poirot, more questions? One question, doctor, most urgent. Poirot's eyes swept the room, taking in the locked cabinet against the wall, the desk with its neat stacks of papers, the shelves of medical texts. You mentioned this morning that you keep strychnine in your surgery. I must know. When did you last verify that your supply was intact? Harding's face went pale. I check the controlled substances weekly, Sunday evenings, usually. So you have not checked since last Sunday? No. I was planning to do so tonight after... He stopped, understanding dawning in his eyes. You think the poison came from here? I think it is possible. Will you check now, doctor? Harding moved to the cabinet with trembling hands. He produced a key from his waistcoat pocket and unlocked the door, revealing rows of bottles and boxes, each neatly labeled. Morphine, laudanum, digitalis. He moved along the shelf, checking each container. Then he stopped. His face, already pale, went ashen. The strychnine, he whispered. It's gone. Poirot's eyes gleamed with grim satisfaction. When was it last present? Last Sunday, I checked the levels myself. There was a full bottle, perhaps 30 grains. More than enough to kill a man. 10 times over. Hastings' voice was barely audible. Someone took it. Someone came into my surgery and stole poison from my cabinet. The cabinet was locked? Yes, always. And the key? Hastings' hand went involuntarily to his waistcoat pocket. I keep it on my person, always. No one else has access. Poirot studied him for a long moment. And yet, Doctor, the strychnine is gone. Either someone obtained a duplicate key, or he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Hastings sank into his desk chair, his head in his hands. I did not kill him, Monsieur Poirot. I swear to you. Yes, I hated Harold Blackwood. Yes, I blamed him for my brother's death, but I could not commit murder. And yet the poison came from your surgery. You had motive, means, and opportunity. A jury would find that most compelling. I know. The words were broken. I know how it looks, but I am innocent. Poirot was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he moved toward the doctor's desk. His eyes swept the surface. Papers, a blotter, a pen stand, a small calendar. Doctor, he said quietly, you mentioned that you check your controlled substances on Sunday evenings. Last Sunday, you verified the strychnine was present. What did you do after that? I closed the surgery and went home. It was nearly 8 o'clock. And during the week? Did anyone visit the surgery after hours? Any emergencies? Any late patients? Hastings thought carefully. Tuesday evening, Mrs. Collins with her croup. Thursday morning, young Tom Higgins cut himself at the pub, needed stitches. He paused. And Friday afternoon, Miss Pembury came for her nerve tonic. Poirot's head snapped up. Miss Pembury? Yes, she suffers from anxiety, has done for years. I prescribe a mild sedative. She collects it monthly. And when she visited on Friday, where were you? In the examination room, preparing her prescription. She waited here, in the surgery. Alone? Hastings' face changed as understanding dawned. Yes, alone. For perhaps 10 minutes while He stopped, horror spreading across his features. No, surely not. Miss Pembury she's a gentle woman, a church organist. She was alone in your surgery for 10 minutes, Poirot said softly. Long enough to observe where you kept your keys. Long enough, perhaps, to make an impression in wax or soap. Long enough to plan. But the cabinet was locked. A lock can be picked, Doctor, or a key duplicated. Miss Pembury has been preparing communion elements at St. Dunstan's for 23 years. She knows the church, the vestry, the routines. She knows that Harold Blackwood tasted the communion wine before every service. Poirot's voice hardened, and she has nursed a hatred for 40 years, a hatred born of destroyed love and broken promises. I felt a chill run down my spine. Poirot, are you saying? I am saying, Hastings, that the little gray cells have finally seen clearly. He straightened, his eyes bright with certainty. I know who killed Harold Blackwood, and tomorrow morning in the church hall, I shall prove it. But even as we left the surgery, stepping out into the rain-soaked night, Poirot paused on the threshold. His brow furrowed, and I saw doubt flicker across his features. What is it? Something still troubles me, Hastings, a loose thread that does not quite fit the pattern. He shook his head, slowly. Miss Pembury had motive and opportunity, but the figure seen at the church, tall, in a dark coat, Miss Pembury is a small woman, slight of build. Perhaps the witnesses were mistaken. The light was poor. Perhaps. But he did not sound convinced. Come, Hastings, We must return to Dr. Pemberton's and think. The truth, it is almost within our grasp, but not quite. Not yet. As we walked through the darkened village, the church tower loomed against the clouded sky, its ancient stones witness to centuries of secrets. Somewhere in St. Dunstan's hollow, a murderer waited, and Poirot, I knew, would not rest until justice was done. Chapter 6. Judgment Day. The morning dawned clear and bright, as though the heavens themselves wished to illuminate the truth that had lain hidden in shadow. I rose early, finding Poirot already dressed and immaculate, his egg-shaped head tilted thoughtfully as he gazed out the window toward the church tower. "You slept well, Hastings?" "Barely at all," I admitted. My mind kept turning over the evidence. Miss Pembury, the stolen strychnine, the figure at the church. Ah, yes, the figure. Poirot's mustache twitched. That detail, it troubled me greatly through the night, but in the small hours, Hastings, the little gray cells finally perceived the truth. "You know who the murderer is?" "I have known since yesterday evening, but knowing and proving, these are different things entirely." He turned from the window, his eyes bright with that peculiar intensity that always preceded his greatest revelations. "This morning we shall do both." By 9:30, the church hall was filled. Constable Davies had summoned everyone at Poirot's request. The principal figures in our drama assembled once more, their faces tight with anxiety and suspicion. Mrs. Edith Blackwood sat in the front row, her black dress severe against her pale skin. Beside her, Geoffrey Blackwood fidgeted with barely contained impatience. Reverend Whitmore had taken a seat near the window, his hands clasped as though in prayer, his eyes fixed on some distant point. Miss Agatha Pembury perched on the edge of her chair, her thin fingers twisting in her lap. Dr. Marcus Harding stood near the door, arms crossed, his face a mask of controlled tension. And Albert Finch, the weathered sexton, sat apart from the others, his gnarled hands resting on his knees. Mrs. Thornton had positioned herself near the tea service, observing everything with her sharp, knowing eyes. Even Tom Higgins, the landlord of the Lamb and Flag, had been summoned, a bewildered witness to proceedings he did not fully understand. Dr. Pemberton stood beside me, his round face creased with concern. "Are you certain about this, Poirot? Accusing someone in front of the whole village?" "It is the only way, mon ami. The truth must be spoken aloud, where all can hear, where denial becomes impossible." Poirot moved to the front of the room, positioning himself before the empty fireplace. The morning light fell upon him, illuminating his immaculate suit, his precisely waxed mustache, his keen and penetrating eyes. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice calm yet commanding, "we are gathered here to unveil a truth that has lain hidden beneath the peaceful surface of this village. The murder of Harold Blackwood was not a sudden act of passion, not a crime of opportunity. It was a calculated execution, planned with patience and precision by someone who knew him well." A murmur rippled through the assembled company. I saw Geoffrey Blackwood's jaw tighten, Miss Pembury's hands clench, Dr. Harding's eyes narrow. "Let us begin with what we know," Poirot continued. "On Saturday evening at 6 o'clock, Miss Pembury prepared the communion wine and left it in the vestry. The vestry door was unlocked. From that moment until the following morning, anyone with access to the church could have tampered with that wine." "Anyone with a key," Constable Davies interjected. "Or anyone who found the door open, Constable. The church, she was not secured overnight. A determined killer had many hours in which to act. Poirot paused, his gaze sweeping the room. And yet, the poisoning of communion wine presents a significant problem. How could the killer be certain that only Harold Blackwood would drink from that flagon? What if Miss Pembury had sampled it while preparing? What if the vicar had taken a sip during his morning preparations? What if an early parishioner had arrived and been offered refreshment? He let the questions hang in the air. The answer, mes amis, is that the killer knew something about Harold Blackwood that few others knew. A private ritual, a Sunday morning habit. Blackwood, before every service, would pour himself a glass of communion wine while reviewing the church accounts. He called it testing the quality. In truth, it was simple arrogance, the tyrant helping himself to that which was meant for God. I saw Mrs. Blackwood nod almost imperceptibly. This habit was not widely known, but it was known to certain individuals. The household servants, the church staff, Monsieur Finch, Miss Pembury, Reverend Whitmore, the family, Madame Blackwood, Monsieur Geoffrey, and Dr. Harding, who once treated Blackwood for indigestion on a Sunday morning and heard him complain that the wine had been off. "You're saying one of us is the murderer," Geoffrey Blackwood said flatly. "We've established that already. Get on with it. Patience, monsieur. The truth, she cannot be rushed." Poirot's eyes glinted. "Let us consider the means. The poison used was strychnine, a terrible substance that causes death by convulsion. Dr. Harding keeps strychnine in his surgery for legitimate medical purposes. Yesterday evening we discovered that his supply had been stolen." All eyes turned to Dr. Harding, who stiffened under the collective gaze. "The cabinet was locked," Harding said through gritted teeth. "I keep the key on my person at all times." "Indeed, and yet the strychnine is gone. How was this accomplished?" Poirot raised a finger. "On Friday afternoon, Miss Pembury visited the surgery to collect her nerve tonic. For approximately 10 minutes, she was alone in the waiting room, while Dr. Harding prepared her prescription. Long enough, perhaps, to observe where the key was kept, long enough to make an impression in wax or soap, long enough to plan. Miss Pembury rose to her feet, her face white as chalk. "You're accusing me? I couldn't—" "Please, mademoiselle, sit. I have not finished." She sank back into her chair, trembling visibly. Miss Pembury had motive, a powerful motive stretching back 20 years. Harold Blackwood destroyed her fiancé, Thomas Harding, with a false accusation of theft. Thomas died in London, broken and alone. Miss Pembury has never forgiven, never forgotten. Poirot's voice softened. "Such grief, mademoiselle, I understand. It does not heal. It merely hardens." "I didn't kill him," Miss Pembury whispered. "I hated him, yes, but I didn't. And yet you prepared the communion wine. You had access to the vestry. You knew of Blackwood's Sunday ritual. You were alone in Dr. Harding's surgery 2 days before the murder." Poirot spread his hands. "A jury would find these facts most compelling." "Then arrest me," she said, her voice steadying with desperate defiance. "If you believe I'm guilty, arrest me." "Ah, but I do not believe you are guilty, mademoiselle." The room fell silent. Even I stared at Poirot in confusion. "You do not?" Constable Davies looked utterly bewildered. "No, Miss Pembury had motive and opportunity, yes, but she lacks the final element, the proof." Poirot began to pace, his small feet moving precisely across the wooden floor. "You see, we have 2 witnesses who saw a figure at the church during the critical hours." Reverend Whitmore observed someone entering at 10 o'clock Saturday night. Albert Finch saw someone leaving at 5:45 Sunday morning. Both described a tall figure in a dark coat. He stopped, turning to face Miss Pembury directly. Miss Pembury is a small woman, slight of build. Even in a heavy coat, she could not be mistaken for a tall figure. The witnesses, they saw someone else. Miss Pembury's shoulders sagged with relief. "Then who?" Geoffrey Blackwood demanded. "Who did they see?" "An excellent question, monsieur." Poirot's eyes swept the room once more. "Let us consider the other suspects. Reverend Whitmore, he has perhaps the strongest motive of all. His brother James was destroyed by Blackwood 40 years ago. The vicar has nursed his hatred ever since, requesting assignment to this very parish so he might watch his enemy grow old." Whitmore raised his head, his face haggard. "I told you, I did not kill him. I am a man of God." "You have a key to the vestry. You knew Blackwood's habits. You were alone on Saturday evening with no alibi." Poirot paused. "And you saw the figure entering the church at 10 o'clock, but you did not investigate. Why not, Reverend?" "I assumed it was Harold." "Did you? Or did you know who it was and choose not to interfere?" The vicar's face crumpled. I don't know what you're suggesting." "I am suggesting, Reverend, that you saw someone you recognized, someone whose presence at the church at that hour did not surprise you, someone you chose to protect." The silence stretched unbearably. "Let us move on," Poirot said finally. "Dr. Harding, another man with ancient grievances. His brother Thomas was Miss Pembury's fiancé, the victim of Blackwood's false accusation. Dr. Harding has lived in this village for decades, watching the man who destroyed his brother prosper and grow powerful. And the poison, the strychnine, came from his own surgery." "I told you," Harding said, his voice tight. "Someone stole it. I did not." "You have medical knowledge. You understand poisons, their effects, their dosages. You knew of Blackwood's Sunday ritual, having treated him for indigestion." Poirot shook his head. "And yet, Doctor, your alibi for Sunday morning is solid. You were attending a patient at Dr. Pemberton's cottage when the messenger arrived with news of the death. You could not have been at the church. Then why mention me at all?" "Because, Doctor, the strychnine came from your surgery, and I do not believe you gave it willingly, which means someone else took it, someone who had access to your keys." The room seemed to hold its breath. This brings us to the figure seen at the church, tall, wearing a dark coat, moving carefully, entering at 10 o'clock Saturday night, leaving at 5:45 Sunday morning. Poirot stopped pacing, his body very still. I asked myself, who in this village is tall? Who moves with careful deliberation? Who had access to Dr. Harding's surgery, not through trickery, but through trust? His gaze settled on Albert Finch. The sexton's weathered face went pale. "Me? You're accusing me?" "You have keys to everything, Monsieur Finch. Church, vestry, cellar, tower. You have worked at St. Dunstan's for 40 years. You know every ritual, every habit, every secret. I found the body. Why would I? A clever murderer often discovers the crime. It deflects suspicion." Poirot's voice hardened. "And you, Monsieur Finch, have a motive that cuts deeper than any other in this room." Finch's hands gripped his knees, the knuckles white. "Your son," Poirot said quietly. "Private William Finch. His name is carved on the war memorial outside this church. He died in 1917, fighting in France. My boy." The words were barely a whisper. My William. He enlisted in 1915, 18 years old, full of patriotism and courage. He marched away to war while Harold Blackwood, a man of the same age, equally fit, remained safely at home. A reserved occupation, they called it, essential agricultural work. Poirot's lip curled with contempt. In truth, it was bribery and cowardice. Finch's head sank lower. Your son died at Passchendaele, and for 25 years you have watched his killer, for that is how you see it, non? Prosper, and rule this village like a petty king. You have polished his brass, swept his church, accepted his meager wages. Poirot's voice dropped. Such humiliation, such rage, buried beneath 40 years of servitude. I didn't. Finch's voice broke. I wanted to, God knows. Every day I wanted to, but I didn't. Non, Monsieur Finch, you did not. Once again, the room fell silent in confusion. Then who? Geoffrey Blackwood exploded. You've accused everyone and cleared everyone. Who killed my uncle? Poirot smiled, a thin, cold smile that held no warmth. I have been approaching this mystery from the wrong direction, mes amis. I looked for someone with old grievances, someone with decades of hatred stored like poison in the heart. But I neglected to ask a simpler question. Who benefits most immediately from Harold Blackwood's death? His gaze shifted to Geoffrey Blackwood. You inherit the estate, monsieur, the house, the lands, the investments. You would have been disinherited. Your uncle threatened to leave everything to the church, but he had not yet changed the will. You benefit most directly from his death. I have an alibi. Geoffrey's face flushed with anger. I was at the Lamb and Flag until midnight. Half the village saw me. Indeed, an excellent alibi. Too excellent, perhaps. Poirot turned to Tom Higgins, who had been watching the proceedings with growing bewilderment. Monsieur Higgins, you are the landlord of the Lamb and Flag. Can you confirm that Geoffrey Blackwood was in your establishment on Saturday evening? Higgins nodded vigorously. Aye, he was. Came in around 8, drank steadily until closing, could barely walk when he left. And what time did he leave? Midnight, maybe a few minutes past. And you are certain, absolutely certain, that he remained in the pub throughout that time? He did not step out, even briefly? Higgins hesitated. Well, there was a spell around 10 o'clock when it got busy. Lot of farmers in for their Saturday pint. I was pulling drinks, couldn't watch everyone. So it is possible that Monsieur Blackwood left briefly and returned without your noticing. I suppose. But he was in his seat when things quieted down. Merci, Monsieur Higgins. That is most helpful. Geoffrey Blackwood had gone pale. This is absurd. I was drinking. You were seen drinking. There is a difference. Poirot's eyes bored into him. The church is a 10-minute walk from the Lamb and Flag. At 10 o'clock, when the pub was busy, you slipped out. You walked to St. Dunstan's, entered through the main door. Reverend Whitmore saw you from his window, but did not recognize you in your dark coat. You went to the vestry, where the communion wine waited, and you added the strychnine. I didn't have strychnine. How would I? You obtained it from Dr. Harding's surgery. Not on Friday when Miss Pembury visited. That was mere coincidence. No, you took it earlier in the week, Thursday morning, to be precise. Dr. Harding stepped forward, his face dawning with realization. Thursday morning. Tom Higgins came with a cut hand. I stitched him up. And where was Monsieur Blackwood while you were occupied with your patient? He came to return a book he'd borrowed. Medical text on poisons. Said he wanted to write a novel. Harding's voice shook. I told him to leave it on my desk. I was busy with Tom's hand. So he was alone in your surgery, with access to your cabinet, a duplicate key, or a skilled hand with a lock-pick, and the strychnine was his. The color drained from Geoffrey Blackwood's face. He looked around the room as though seeking escape, but Constable Davies had moved to block the door. "You have no proof," Geoffrey said, but his voice had lost its bluster. "Speculation, that's all." "Ah, but I have more than speculation, monsieur." Poirot reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a brass key, old and worn. "This key was found in your coat pocket this morning, when Constable Davies searched your room at my request. It is a duplicate of the key to Dr. Harding's medicine cabinet." Geoffrey stared at the key, his face contorted. Rage, fear, and finally, collapse. "You don't understand," he whispered. "You can't understand. My father worked himself to death for that estate while Harold lived like a lord. He promised that I would inherit. And then, after everything, he was going to give it all to the church. The church! So you killed him. He deserved to die." The words burst out like a dam breaking. All of them, the whole village, they hated him. I did what they were too cowardly to do. I freed them. "You freed yourself, monsieur. Do not dress murder in noble garments." Geoffrey Blackwood sagged in his chair, the fight draining out of him. Constable Davies moved forward, handcuffs ready. "Geoffrey Blackwood," the constable said, his voice steadier now, "I am arresting you for the murder of Harold Blackwood. You do not have to say anything, but anything you do say may be given in evidence." As Davies led the young man away, the assembled company sat in stunned silence. Miss Pembury wept quietly. Dr. Harding stared at his hands as though seeing them for the first time. Reverend Whitmore's lips moved in silent prayer. Only Mrs. Edith Blackwood remained composed. She rose from her chair and approached Poirot, her eyes dry but troubled. "He was so kind to me," she said softly. "After Harold died, he promised I could stay at Blackwood House. He seemed so sincere. The kindness of killers, madame, is often genuine. They do not see themselves as monsters. They see themselves as instruments of justice." Poirot sighed. Geoffrey Blackwood believed he was righting ancient wrongs. Instead, he merely added to them. "What will happen to the estate now? That, madame, is a question for the solicitors, but I suspect that you, as Harold's widow, will not be left destitute." She nodded slowly, then turned and walked out into the morning sunshine. Later, as Poirot and I walked through the churchyard, the ancient stones casting long shadows across the grass, I found myself reflecting on the case. "You knew it was Geoffrey all along?" "Not all along, Hastings. I suspected several people at various points, but the detail that troubled me, the tall figure seen at the church, led me eventually to the truth. Miss Pembury is small, Reverend Whitmore is of medium height, but Geoffrey Blackwood is tall, well-built, and his alibi, though seemingly solid, had a fatal weakness. The busy period at the pub. Précisément. He counted on the chaos to cover his absence, and it nearly worked. Poirot paused beside the war memorial, his eyes tracing the carved names. "This village, Hastings, it is wounded. Wounded by war, by tyranny, by secrets kept too long. Harold Blackwood was a symptom of that sickness, not its cause. And now perhaps, they can begin to heal." He straightened his coat. "Come, mon ami. We shall collect our bags from Dr. Pemberton's and catch the afternoon train to London. The little gray cells, they require rest after such exertion." As we walked away from the church, the bells began to toll. Not for a funeral this time, but simply marking the hour. 11 solemn notes echoing across the valley. Behind us, St. Dunstan's Hollow lay quiet in the autumn sunshine. The tyrant was dead, his murderer unmasked, and justice, however imperfect, had been served. "There is no greater crime, Hastings," Poirot said softly, "than to kill for inheritance, money, land, possessions. They are dust in the end. Only the truth endures. And the truth has been found. Oui, mon ami." He permitted himself a small, satisfied smile. "The truth has been found." And so concludes our tale of Death on the Sabbath, a story of old wounds and new sins, of piety and poison, of judgment rendered in a village where secrets ran deep and the past never truly died. Thank you for joining us on this journey through shadows into light. Until next time, may your own mysteries be few and their solutions swift. Bonne nuit, mes amis. Bonne nuit.